Welcome, everyone, to the onpoli podcast. I'm John Michael McGrath.
And I'm Jessica Smith-Cross.
Today on the pod, Canadians will head to the polls on April 28th, a recap on the race so far and the trade war framing it.
What's the Trump bump, and how is Doug Ford benefiting from it?
And we look into some contradictory statements from the provincial government on supervised consumption sites.
It's March 28, 2025, so let's get to it.
You are not Steve Paikin.
I am not Steve Paikin. This is not his charming mug.
No, your charming mug, though. You are joining us once again. We had you on the podcast a few weeks ago for the election, or for the provincial election. Now we've got the federal election, and we thought we would have you on again. Steve will be back next week. I don't want anybody to panic, but welcome.
Thank you. I was really excited about coming on today. I didn't have a Bill Davis shirt, though.
We'll allow it. You are wearing something else instead.
I am wearing a jean shirt, and I'm wearing jeans, so I'm getting as close as I can to the Canadian tuxedo, hoping to tap into that, really.
The national sentiment across the land right now, yes. I'm wearing a Blue Jays hoodie to honor the home opener, which happened yesterday and was incredibly disappointing, and let's speak no further of it.
I'm sorry for all of us.
Let's remind our audience about who you are and the Trillium, which you are the editor-in-chief for.
That's right. I am the editor-in-chief of the Trillium. We're an online all Ontario politics, all Ontario policy news site. You can read our stuff on your local village media news outlet, Sioux Today, Toronto Today, everything in between. But for all of our coverage, even all the insidery stuff, you subscribe.
Before we get to issue one, we want to let our audience know that we're doing a special interview after the show with the Thread's Nam Kiwanuka. We'll be talking to her about the show's latest episode on the rural healthcare crisis in Ontario. Do make sure to stick around for that after the show. And with that, let's get to issue one. Late last week, Prime Minister and Liberal leader Mark Carney called a snap election for April 28th, which means Ontarians will vote a second time this year. Jessica, what's the state of play so far?
Well, it looks like the Liberals to lose right now, which is kind of surprising. Most polls have the Liberals leading the Tories, which looked very impossible just a few months ago. So this is wild in politics. You don't see such a change all that often. So before Justin Trudeau resigned, before Mark Carney won the leadership, and before Trump and his tariffs did everything to mess with Canadian politics, the Conservatives looked like they were going to win this thing. It didn't look like anything was going to change that. It looked like the Liberals were in for like a historically bad showing, but that's all changed. And so we're talking Ontario politics here, though not federal. And there's been sort of a fascinating through story about that this week. The Toronto Star learned that Campaign Research, which is like the PC's internal
in-house polling firm.
Yeah,
this is Nick Kouvalis' firm. Yes.
Yes, and has helped the PCs do very well in Ontario for a long time now. So they have a poll showing the federal Tories just doing terribly in Ontario, losing to the Liberals right after the Ford PCs had won a whopping majority. And Ford's campaign manager gave this poll to the Star to let everybody know, and then went on the record to say, like, these guys are going to get obliterated if they don't change their way. So maybe there's been some tension between federal, provincial cousins here, but it's been sort of a fascinating story for the week in Ontario politics.
Yeah, I mean, the dynamic right now between the federal and provincial Conservative parties is so fascinating, and honestly, we might have to do a whole other episode just devoted to that. But just on the rapid shift in the polling numbers, I was talking to one of our colleagues yesterday and saying that it's almost like if you've looked at like any of the charts that were affected by COVID-19, like a GDP chart, right, where for the rest of time we're always going to be able to see that weird swing in the chart. It's like Canadian polling almost looks like that wild right now, where you saw the Liberals just slump, and then suddenly it's like a straight line back up again.
Up like
it's just
a rocket.
The craziest thing to see. The reason for that, we think, the question framing this election so far seems to be who will deal with Donald Trump better. The latest development as we record this, and Lord knows it could change before this goes to air, is a 25% tariff from the United States on all foreign cars that would apply to Canadian-made goods, we think. But car parts are also supposed to be included in the Canada, US, Mexico agreement that was negotiated in Trump term 1. I guess we're going to get better details on April 2nd when it's actually supposed to be implemented. But let's talk a little bit about how have the candidates in the federal election reacted to this news.
Yeah, everybody's condemned it. That's clear all around. Everybody's very serious, taking on their most national leader tones to call it words like a full frontal attack on Canadian auto workers. That was Jagmeet Singh. A direct attack on Canada. That was Mark Carney. Pierre Poilievre up talking about Canada having to retaliate. Carney briefly suspended his election campaign to go into prime minister mode and have a meeting with his council on Canada-U.S. relations to talk about the country's response. He's already announced some policy measures in his capacity as prime minister. So a $2 billion fund to help the auto sector affected, some things to help corporate Canada, like deferring income tax, GST and HST remittances until the end of June. Poilievre's line is that Trump should knock it off, like they're a misbehaving child, and
yes.
I think I've told my own children to knock it off. But he also says that if Trump doesn't, Canada will be stronger. Under 4 years of a conservative leadership, Canada will be strong enough to go on its own. It will use its resources, which he'll unlock, and then we'll sell them to other buyers other than the U.S.
Right. So some of those measures, like the GST and HST remittances, are very familiar if you remember COVID, which is now 5 years ago. But the similar policies were announced then. Obviously, you can see these governments sort of going back to policies that they adopted last time. I also want to sort of mention, because we love to talk about the caretaker convention on this podcast. It does also apply federally, and there is, I think, some debate to be had about just how far Carney can go as prime minister in the middle of an election that he called. The usual exceptions for the caretaker convention, which are supposed to constrain the power of the government during an election period, are emergencies, which you could argue this is, or if the measure is uncontroversial, which in this context would mean, do the other parties agree to it? I think, broadly speaking, we will see a lot of support for retaliatory tariffs, that kind of thing. But, is Pierre Poilievre going to come out and say, yes, I support these measures that Prime Minister / Liberal leader Carney is announcing? That will be an interesting thing to watch. Is there anything else that we should know so far?
Well, we all know that we know now that Mark Carney is going to run in the Ottawa riding of Nepean, which is kind of fun. It's right beside Pierre Poilievre's riding.
They're going to be neighbors.
Yeah, good neighbors. There's a bit of an interesting backstory to that. The riding had been held by a Liberal, Chanda Arya, since 2015. But then he ran in the leadership race for the Liberals, but was disqualified. We've since learned, thanks to the Globe and Mail's reporting, that this had to do with a trip to India in which he visited Prime Minister Narendra Modi and didn't tell anybody about. And so he's been disqualified. That opened up this Ottawa area for Carney to run in, which is where Carney lives now. Not where in Ottawa he lives, but in Ottawa, the city where he lives.
I have to say, Arya's response to the Globe and Mail reporting was kind of astonishing, where he met with a foreign head of government and didn't tell the prime minister or anybody in foreign affairs, and when asked about it by the Globe and Mail, said, well, I travel a lot and I meet lots of people.
It's the prime minister of a country we're not on great terms. Yes, obviously, in the context of a country that is credibly accused of murdering Canadian citizens, this is more than just you didn't meet your uncle for lunch, He said a few eye-raising things during the leadership race. He also talked about how speaking French wasn't all that important. He just, from the get-go, was an odd fit in the leadership politics.
Yeah, well, he will no longer be in federal politics, and perhaps Mark Carney will win that seat. All right, on to issue 2. A new poll from Angus Reid shows that some premiers are receiving the Trump bump, a sudden rise in approval ratings amidst the U.S. president's tariff threats. Among those receiving the bump is Doug Ford. He's still the third least popular premier in Canada, but it is certainly a change in fortunes. Jess, what do you make of this?
That people like Doug Ford in a time of crisis. We've talked a little bit already on this show about how things now feel like they were in COVID for various reasons. That's what this feels like too to me. So according to this poll, Ford's popularity has risen 14 points to 48%. That's the measure of you take away how many people don't like you from the way how many do. So it's a 48% approval rating. He's been hovering in the low 30s for like the past 2 years since his last rise during COVID. But his reaction to Donald Trump's tariff has given him a massive boost, another kind of skyrocketing chart that we can see there. So like before during COVID, there are some similarities. We see that Doug Ford, who's in Captain Canada or leadership mode, he's talking in front of the cameras more than he usually does. And he's doing it in that sort of plain spoken, you can trust me way. And he's also talking a lot about working with the federal Liberals, which is something that it seems like people in Ontario like to see. He's the guy who's going to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done, and he's not putting partisanship in front of that. I think that might explain a lot of this shooting up in the polls. Yeah, and
it's worth distinguishing between Ford's personal approval rating and the obvious fact that even though he had, let's say charitably call it middling personal approval ratings, he still just won a pretty handy majority in the legislature. There's always a difference between the approval ratings that voters give to individual politicians versus the question of will you vote for their party in the next election. So that said, I think it's pretty clear that you're right here, that the Premier's tough talk and his that style of like coming to the microphone and giving people kind of briefings, right? That worked for him well in COVID. It seems to be working for him well now. But the tenor, I think, has changed. It's not quite as combative as it had been a few weeks ago. He's cooled off a little bit on some of the language that he was using about Donald Trump and the White House. We are, as I say, holding our breath a bit to learn what exactly is going to happen on April 2nd. These auto tariffs, there's still, frankly, some ambiguity about those. And then there's like the rest of the universe that isn't auto tariffs, and we'll see how that goes. Do you think that the Premier taking at least a small step back here, like cooling the language off a little bit, will affect that image, that Captain Canada image that he is portraying? Yeah, he has. And he's talked about taking the temperature down on purpose. But then he's still delivering lines like, we're going to make sure that the president of the United States feels Americans' pain in a way that they've never felt it before. So taking the temperature down isn't like all the way down, maybe more of a simmer. And but he has also not committed to bringing back the electricity surcharge. Okay. So he had very briefly put on an extra surcharge on the electricity that we export to the United States. And that's what actually caught the attention of Donald Trump to Doug Ford for the first time. Yeah. But he has still backed off that. So he backed off that when Trump decided to not escalate tariffs on steel and aluminum even farther. And now he says he's being very wary about doing that again because he doesn't want to prompt retaliation that will harm the rest of the country. Right. So it's a reasonable argument about keeping the whole national interest in mind. Yeah, and Trump is doing things like posting to Truth Social that if Canada and the EU work together to inflict economic harm on the US, then he's going to retaliate. There's this whole vibe of like, how dare you fight back? That is, I don't quite know how Canada or Ontario is going to be able to respond to it. Andrew Furey, the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, who called Trump a maniac, has actually received the biggest Trump bump, giving him the highest approval rating in the country. So clearly we see that opposing Trump is a popular stance, but the premiers, I have to imagine, they want to cut a deal fast when we know who the next prime minister is, or the current prime minister if he wins re-election. Or, sorry, Carney will be winning his first election. I keep having to remember that. They are going to want to cut a deal so the next 4 years are not entirely consumed by tariffs. Do we think that there might actually be a post-Trump slump to match the bump if things settle down? I think it depends. Like, are we talking Danielle Smith type of capitulation here? Right? So she has been risking a lot with her more friendly attitude towards the United States. She's going down there. She's talking to conservatives in a very friendly way. And that seems to be hurting her, at least in like the national view of her. Yes. I think if the other premiers tone it down a bit to secure a deal, they're not going to receive a huge backlash. I like to think that most voters would say, like, okay, it's worth us to play nice a bit to receive less economic pain, but you don't know, right? This like nationalism feeling that people are having, right, is very strong, and people feel very good when they are told about how strong Canada is and how strong we are fighting back. So maybe they will receive a Trump
slump in a little while. And then there's just like the passage of time, right?
Yes.
Maybe one day we will get to move on to other issues, and this won't be top of mind anymore. I hope at some point that happens. And at that point, we could see the approval ratings come down again. And this is what happened with Doug Ford, sort of in late COVID, as things sort of wore on, dragged on. This as they started to get into the rearview mirror, his approval ratings slumped down again to closer to where they were before the whole thing began.
Well, someday we might be able to move on from Trump and his tariffs, but for us right now, we are going to move on to issue 3. On April 1st, 10 of Ontario's supervised consumption sites are slated to close due to a law that prohibits their operation within 200 meters of a school or childcare centre. However, comments from a government lawyer seem to contradict those from the Minister of Health, Sylvia Jones. Jess, this was a story that Jack Howan at the Trillium got, and it caught my eye. So why don't you tell our audience about it?
Yeah, Jack did a great job here. So he was covering these court hearings for this injunction, trying to get the courts to say that the province can't shut down these supervised injection sites right away while this court hearing is being heard. Now, one of the lawyers working for the government on this, his name's Zachary Green, was making an argument in court that said that these sites actually could just move, that all the government was doing was stopping them from being within 200 meters from a school. But Health Minister Sylvia Jones has not been saying that. And on that very day, after the lawyer said it in court, Jack went to her office, they confirmed, no, they can't move. Part of this is we're stopping them, anybody from setting up new ones. And that includes the new one you'd have to set up to relocate and move. So that's maybe doesn't look great on the government's side of things. And one of the important things about this court case, at least for the advocates involved, is that if they can't set up elsewhere, if they can't move, there isn't going to be any other options for the people who rely on these sites to stay alive.
Right. And so just to give a bit more of the background, if I can, I mean, the issue here is that the Charter protects, among other things, the right to personal security and the right to life, if I could put it that way. And the question here is whether this change in policy is in fact going to lead to people suffering and dying. And the court is going to have to adjudicate on that decision. But on the precise matter here, right? The question, like, even if a safe consumption site could muster the resources to move, that's a complex logistical operation. These are not, simply like 4 walls and a roof kind of facilities. There seem to be impassable legal hurdles in practice.
Yeah, the health minister's word here is going to be law. They're not going to let them open up anywhere else, which means, so according to Health Canada, there are 23 sites in Ontario, not all of them provincially funded, but open. 13 will remain open. And in some places, there are none at all. Like some parts of the province, there are none at all. There were none at all, or in some cases, the only one that was there is getting shut down. And so the advocates who are launching this charter challenge and who are fighting on behalf of these say that the ones that even are left are going to be overwhelmed with demand. And they are arguing that it's going to cause death. Street Health, which is a Toronto-based organization, is hiring grief counselors to help the staff manage the deaths that they expect to be coming when they have to shut down.
I want to ask one sort of side note here, just on the timing of it, because there are rules about like what you can and can't introduce into court as evidence. But was anybody able to use Jack's reporting on like the second day of the hearing? Do you know? Did anybody actually get to say, like, actually the government is contradicting themselves in public here?
I actually don't know.
Okay.
That would be
we'll have to
look
into that, because you can't always introduce these kinds of things in that kind of a judicial procedure. Anyways, I was curious. So do we know what happens next?
So the charter challenge is going to go ahead. They haven't ruled yet on the injunction. So there will be a ruling at some point, and this is one of those cases where it could be soon, but they didn't rule immediately after the final arguments were made. The charter challenge itself will be over this argument we've touched upon about whether the closure of these sites will violate the charter right to life and safety and security of the person. They argue that it forces people into unsafe consumption, which will result in them dying. But the province is arguing that by banning the sites, they are undoing harm because there's sort of drug dealing and antisocial behavior around these sites. One of the biggest example of this is the death of a woman who was shot outside a supervised consumption site in Toronto. In the meantime, the province is setting up heart hubs. So this is services for drug users, but on a no supervised consumption, no harm reduction supply, is more of an abstinence-based models for services. And they've been funding these in the places where the consumption sites have been shutting down, and other places as well.
Yeah, and these sites, I mean, I think the critics would say that they are not going to be as effective because they are not going to offer the same range of services that the supervised consumption sites are able to offer. This is a whole debate that is happening in multiple provinces right now about what is the proper and effective way to do addiction treatment. We're not going to settle that argument today on the podcast, but I do think that it's going to be one of those issues that obviously, I mean, well, we've got 4 years of this new legislature, and it's going to be one we're going to be spending a lot of time paying attention to.
Absolutely.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the mailbag. If you've got a burning question or an insightful comment, you can send it along to onpolitics@tvo.org. And Jessica, as the guest, would you like to do the honor and read today's letter?
I would love to. So this comes from an anonymous listener, very mysterious.
We do periodically allow people to submit anonymously, yes.
I wonder if their identity is so interesting they had to hide it.
Well, I actually I know who it is, but I'm not going to divulge it on camera.
Okay, this person emailed in to let everyone know that Queen's Park is heading for a milestone.
Yes.
Here's the letter. Hello. I noticed a Facebook post from the wife of one of our new Northern Ontario MPPs, Bill Rosenberg. Janine wrote about his swearing-in ceremony and said that he was the 1,981st person to be a member at Queen's Park. This made me wonder if that 1,981 figure is accurate. Did we roll over to 2,000 during this election? And if not, is it time to start a hashtag onpoli pool? We could take odds on which party, region, riding, or candidate will be number 2,000 and give away some sweet TVO swag to whomever makes the right guess. If anyone would have the interest and ability to investigate this, it'd be you folks.
So I'm not sure if as a public agency we can get involved in gambling, but, you know, we're always looking for different revenue streams for the public purse. We did do a little digging on this issue, and it turns out that a previous clerk of the House went back and counted every single person who had ever been elected to Queen's Park, going all the way back to 1867. There have been, as of this most recent election, 1,993 unique individuals that have been elected to the Legislative Assembly since Confederation. That includes not just general elections, but by-elections. Those 1,993 people have contested something like 4,600 seats in the, 24 elections now? So we didn't quite hit 2,000. Over the next 4 years, could we see 7 by-elections? I mean, that's not impossible, right? Like I think in some years we've seen 7 by-elections. So perhaps we might make it to number 2,000. I certainly intend to keep count.
Yeah.
And I will definitely be alerting our listeners and viewers if we do in fact hit that 2,000 number. This was one of those ones that was totally new to me. I had no idea that these numbers were being kept. And I've been at Queen's Park for a bit more than a decade now, and I like that there are still fun new traditions to learn about.
I love to think of the former clerk sitting there going, okay, let's start at the beginning, and counting and going through and probably recounting to make sure no one was missed.
Oh, I'm certain, yes. And you know, I am told that, well, even you can just judge from this letter, I have been told that MPPs really do like these numbers. They get attached to these numbers. So, yeah.
Awesome. And if anyone wants to email it a guess, TVO will keep it on file and they'll send you a button if you get it right. So a bit of a slow burn on this game. It may take 4 years.
Be patient. That's what we're asking for. All right. Again, if you would like to ask about content on the show, you can always email us at onpolitics@tvo.org. And that's the On Poly podcast for this March 28th, 2025.
You can follow On Poly Podcast on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're happy to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. Write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org and be sure to include your first name, last name, and where you're located.
This week's episode was produced and edited by Matthew O'Mara. Video editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
The managing editor is Katie O'Connor. Laurie Few is the executive producer of Digital. John Ferry is vice president, programming and content.
Special thanks, as always, to our wonderful studio crew for making this video podcast happen. And thank you to Jessica Smith-Cross for joining us this week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. The Thread with Nam Kiwanuka explores the connections between local issues, personal experiences, and community groups making a difference.
Joining us now to talk about the show's latest episode on the rural healthcare crisis in Ontario is the host herself, Nam Kiwanuka. Thanks for coming onto the pod.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Okay, we've got important stuff to discuss,
Yeah.
but before we get to that, we all discuss our wardrobe here. What have you brought for us?
Well, I know you have like fancy t-shirts on the show, so I wanted to come prepared. The one and only Sade.
Very nice.
I love the shirt almost as much as I love her.
All right. So the most recent episode of The Thread is focused on the healthcare crisis, particularly in rural Northern Ontario. Mm-hmm. What is happening there?
The situation is really bad. We know that in the province, over 2.5 million people in Ontario don't have a family doctor, and that number is expected to increase to 4 million by 2026. In rural areas, the situation is worse because of this, but also because there are few hospitals, and the hospitals that are there, it's become almost a normal event for ER departments to be closed. In rural Ontario, ER departments were closed on a temporary basis more than 600 times in 2022 and in 2023.
Quote unquote temporary, right? It happened
Exactly.
600 times, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we hear about ER closures, and I know that 2024 was like the worst year on record, but how does this actually affect people?
Well, think about it. When you go to the ER room, you're going because you need urgent care. Because of the family doctor shortage, we have been hearing that some people might go to the ER because they don't have access to any care. But when we go to the ER, we're going because we need immediate attention. We're experiencing a heart attack. We've been in a car accident. Maybe we've fallen or even had an allergic reaction. And if you go to your local ER and it's closed, you then have to seek out the next closest medical care. If that's an hour away or even 2 hours away, your health is at immediate risk. One of the experts we spoke to on the show, Natalie Mera from the Ontario Health Coalition, told me that, quote, people will die and have likely died as a result of the emergency department closures in this province.
Really serious stuff, but there are solutions out there that are being looked at. What some of the things you've spoken about?
One of the solutions that are being used in rural and northern parts of the province are locums. They are doctors who are flown into communities that need doctors or clinicians. They do the job and then they fly back to their homes. While this is a much needed solution for these areas that don't have doctors, there is a concern that with primary care, there needs to be a continuity of care. And a doctor flying into a community, even like every now and then, wouldn't have the chance to get to know the people they're treating. We spoke to a woman, an elder, who had a dangerous heart condition. She didn't have a family doctor. And even after her condition was diagnosed, like she did everything to try to get care. It was a whole year before she was seen again. But by this time, she had a heart attack. If she had a family doctor, they would have been able to track her condition and to help her to get the immediate care that she needed. Thankfully, she is doing well. But how can an Ontarian have to wait a whole year to get the help they need? And by that time, she almost dies from her condition because she didn't have a family doctor.
It's just not fair that some people don't have that and some people do, and that's just not the way it should be. Mm-hmm. That said, I know the province has put forward some measures to alleviate the family doctor shortage, including the Learn and Stay grant, which will help to train and retain doctors in northern and rural areas. They also have opened more medical schools and residency spots. So the people that you spoke with, what do they think about all that?
The people we spoke to need care now. Yeah. Today. These initiatives are, of course, positive, but solutions are needed right now. We have nurses and doctors from other countries who want to practice in this province. We need to make it easier for people who can move today and to help those in need. Recently, a family doctor in London, Ontario, I know you both saw these images, opened up their office, and there was a line around the block, and it was freezing outside, but people were willing to stand outside for hours to get the opportunity to have a family doctor. We've also seen this happen in Kingston. I think we need to acknowledge what is needed, and all jurisdictions need to move at a rapid pace to resolve this.
Another thread you pulled on in this episode,
Yeah.
pun somewhat intended, is the role of technology and specifically artificial intelligence, what role that's playing in potentially alleviating the crisis. What is being worked on out there?
It's really exciting to see what scientists are working on behind the scenes. It makes my nerdy heart beam with excitement. The government of Ontario has helped to fund a project at St. Michael's Hospital here in Toronto. It's called AI Scribe. It's estimated that currently doctors spend some 19 hours just on paperwork a week. The AI Scribe is used during the doctor's appointments with the consent of the patient, of course. So essentially, it listens to the conversation and transcribes the appointment. This allows the doctor to just focus on what the patient is saying instead of taking notes. They can also revisit the notes later. Another one is called Chart Watch. It helps doctors to identify patients who are at the highest risk, and they are prioritized. It can be challenging for a doctor to keep a so-called eye on like 20 to 25 patients, but the Chart Watch AI tool can monitor hundreds of patients at a time, if not the whole hospital. It's been very successful and has reduced the risk of, quote, unanticipated death in hospitalized patients by 26%.
Yeah. That sounds really good.
Yeah, it is. It's great.
But forgive me for being a little bit cynical. Is better tech, is a tech solution really all that's needed here?
Well, one of the doctors we spoke to, and I quote, said this to us, the healthcare system is being systematically dismantled to make privatized care look like luxurious. And Nali Mehra, again, from the Ontario Health Coalition said, quote, healthcare policy has been driven by cuts. She also said that in the 27 years she's worked in healthcare, it's never been like this. And she's never seen this much disarray. So yes, the tech is much needed, but in short, in their view, more funding is needed.
So there's no quick fixes, no sudden doctors. If this is going to get alleviated, it's going to take years, is what I'm hearing. So are the people that you spoke with for this, are they hopeful at all about the future?
From everyone that we spoke to, what everyone seemed to agree on is that the people who are working in this system right now, the locums, the doctors working around the clock in the ER department, never taking vacations, the nurses doing double shifts, the clinicians doing everything and anything they can do to provide the care their community needs, they are the ones that are keeping the system together. 40% of doctors in Ontario are considering retiring in the next 5 years. 1 in 4 Ontarians are predicted to be without a family doctor by 2026. This is serious. In short, from those that we spoke to, hope is contingent on action and immediate action.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of the season of The Thread. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nam. Why don't you tell our audience where they can find the latest episode?
And thanks so much for having me. You can check out The Thread on YouTube, and this episode will also be playing on Sunday, March 30th at 8:30 p.m. on TVO.
Thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Thanks so much.